Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our session today. My name, you can't hear me? Okay, so I have to move. All right, let's try this again. Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming today and for joining us. And the video is a little too soon. Thank you. So my name is Katrin Harvey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center. We are very proud to be here today with you and to be here with our partners from FAO, CGIAR, and Fairtrade International to host this panel discussion with you today. It's my honor to lead you through today's conversations and be your master of ceremony, and I hope you enjoy the conversations today. We have a very interesting panel and speakers from different high-level representations, but also from change makers on the ground who will tell us more about the realities of smallholder farmers in Africa. We will learn how farmers are forced to adapt to climate change, to which they have not contributed much, if anything at all. And we will get these different perspectives today during our talks. We all know that in some places in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, smallholder farmers are providing up to 80% of the food. And yet, if we look at climate finance, especially adaptation finance, very, very little, less than 2%, end up with the smallholder farmers. With us today also, we're very happy that we have two of our Ban Ki-moon Center Agri champions who will present a demand paper that they developed over the summer. And well, they will highlight some ideas on how we could actually make it better, make lives better for the smallholder farmers specifically. Now to the agenda today. As soon as I leave the podium, we will hear a short message from our co-chair at the Ban Ki-moon Center, the former Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Then we'll have some opening statements, and then we'll go straight into a discussion which is led by our moderator, Sophie Aujean. And so without further ado, I would like to ask Kusivia Hichikumba from the Zambian Green Economy and Environment Ministry to the floor to open the conversations for us. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and distinguished participants, good afternoon. My name is Hichikumba, as the moderator has pointed out, and I'm representing the Minister of Green Economy from Zambia, who should have been with you, but he's engaged with some other commitments, so he couldn't make it, and he asked me if I could represent him. Now, since I'm representing the minister, I think for the opening remarks, I'll follow. I'll just read what he should have actually himself presented, and then for the panel and other questions, I'll be able to take them. But for the message, I think let me stick to the minister's message. Thank you. He's saying, dear distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be here today at this side event focusing on agriculture adaptation and the youth perspective. In Zambia, the impact of climate change is very real. With the change in climate and the rain patterns affecting our smallholder farmers, their livelihoods, and ultimately the country's food security is being compromised. Being reliant on rain-fed agriculture, it means that the Zambian farmers are experiencing the full impact of climate change and are having to adapt to this new reality. However, more adaptation is needed to protect vulnerable communities. Our friends, for example, in the Horn of Africa, have suffered one of the worst climate-related experiences in the past 40 years due to the record-breaking drought. Events such as this should be a wake-up call to all of us. It should signal that adaptation is crucial to the prosperity and the future of Zambia, Africa, and the rest of the world. In the sphere of agriculture, it is the youth who will be taking on the mantle and take guardianship of our food systems for the years to come. They will be the ones feeding our communities, and without taking their voices into account, we will not be able to create resilient and adaptive food systems that can continue to provide food security in a changing climate. I thank the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, with which we have just recently signed a memorandum of understanding to work closely together on this topic, as well as the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, UNSG, and Fairtrade International for providing this platform today for open dialogue and giving the voice to the youth. In Zambia's capacity as chair of the African group of negotiators, it is ever more important that we are involved in such events and incorporate these important perspectives into our work. Thus, I'm very much looking forward to the dialogue today and talking directly with the youth, science and multilaterals to find solutions to help future-proof agriculture systems and improve their resilience to climate change. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hichikumba. Next, I would like to ask Ms. Carla Montesi from the European Commission, Directorate General, I can get it, for Development Cooperation to the stage. Please come.
Thank you. Very happy to have this possibility to join you in this event and to introduce some words that are coming also from our Commissioner, Urpilainen. Why our Commissioner Urpilainen? Because we have at the European Union a Commissioner, a President, Ursula von der Leyen, our Commissioner Urpilainen, that is very, very engaged in having youth very high in our political agenda at the European Union level. Now you are discussing about Africa. Of course, we are listening here at the COP that Africa is on front line of the climate crisis, and we know very well that young people for today and for tomorrow will suffer most from the effect of the climate change. I remember very well last year in Glasgow 26 at the European Union Pavilion, we opened a dialogue with youth, and we were listening very much their call on senior leaders to act fast and equip the communities to adapt to climate change. And I have to say that listening to the voice of youth have created a clearly impetus also at the European level to move very fast in our reform towards, for example, the implementation of food system, sustainable food system. Now, I said youth are the victims of climate change, but we clearly believe that youth are also our hope, because their energy, their enthusiasm, their dynamism, we can say that they are the principal, the most valuable contributors to climate action. We count on youth because we know very well that they are agents of change, they are entrepreneurs, they are innovators. They can scaling up the skills to accelerate the climate change. So as senior leaders, we have to listen to them, and this is very clear for the European leaders. We are discussing here today on agriculture. Allow me to identify two important things. we have the same in Africa and the same in Europe. We need to put everything in place to attract the youth in the agriculture, in the agribusiness, in the agricultural value chain. We need them because they are our future. But secondly, if we want really to succeed in attracting youth in this very difficult sector, we know that we need to ensure that we are able to create decent jobs, that we have to create the appropriate financing system to allow them to have access to finance, and we have to create entrepreneurship opportunities. So this, I think, are the challenging that we have if we want really to identify an answer for the youth in the agricultural sector. Allow me to say that this year, 22, it was a particular year for our partnership with Africa. We had at the beginning of the year the summit, the African Union, European Union summit, where we were discussing about all the priorities in our relationship between Africa and the European Union. And one point, critical point of the discussion was what we can do in the agriculture. Allow me to say that we were there not only to discuss with the leaders, the presidents, the ministers, but we were there also to discuss with youth, with civil society, and local actors. It was a deep discussion that took place just before the senior leaders meeting, and I have to say that we are strongly listening the recommendation of youth for everything that was concerning agriculture and the food system. At this summit, we have launched our future financial instrument for our partnership, the Africa Global Gateway. We were launching a package of 115 billion euro to facilitate in the next 5 years the generation of project and the program. And on all this amount, we have engaged 7.7 billion just in grants from the European Union to facilitate investment in the agriculture. The principal beneficiaries of our intervention will be smallholders and youth. So we are really engaged as European Union to really work on the perspective of youth in the agricultural sector. As I was mentioning before, the principal objective will be to increase access to finance. So we have just adopted some financial instruments to create the possibility to de-risk investment for programs that are coming, investment projects that are coming from youth and also the most vulnerable countries. We are putting in place program and reform with our public leaders in Africa to facilitate and to do everything that is possible to create decent work for youth in the agricultural sector, and also to implement food system approach in different countries in Africa. Creating a sustainable food system will be clearly the priority of our partnership, European Union, Africa. Our action is focused on agriculture, but not only in agriculture. But allow me to say that I was mentioning the engagement from our President von der Leyen, from our Commissioner, to work, to deepen our work with youth in general. And allow me to say that this year was declared the year for youth. We have moved very fast, and we have also proposed to our partners the implementation of the Youth Action Plan with 3 key words: engage, empower, and connect. Engage with youth. We have set up a youth standing board to engage with youth in policy making. We want to listen to youth. We want to work with them in identifying, in defining our policy in the different sectors. I mentioned empower youth because, as I was describing, we really wanted to invest and dedicate funds to promote youth employment in sub-Saharan Africa. And we are, as I was mentioning, directing investment in young food entrepreneurs. And we want to connect youth. This implies really to bringing youth together to exchange and learn. It's a matchmaking between Europe and Africa, but this also means, for example, if I take a specific program as the Great Green Wall Initiative in the Sahel countries, this implies exchange practice, exchange learning, working together with small-scale farmers, youth, to create action, to lead adaptation effort, and to create a more resilient agricultural value chain. So this just to mention some concrete action that are happening from today. So today we are here in the COP. We are continuing listening our youth message, youth recommendation of our work as leaders. I will not able to remain to listen your debate now. Unfortunately, other engagement, but my team will remain with you and will report to me about your discussion and your conclusion. Just to end, it's clear that we want to succeed in our green transition and take into account the demographic process, the demographic challenge that we have in Africa. It's clear that we have only one solution, that is working all together and really focusing on youth in everything that we are doing and we are promoting in our partnership with Africa. I stop here. Many thanks to you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Montesi. And then I would also like to ask Ms. Ismahane Aluafi to give us her opening remarks on behalf of FAO. Oh, you can do it there or here, however you want.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Ban Ki-moon for the opening at the European Commission, Carla. So distinguished guests, youngs, and unfortunately many of us here are young at heart. I don't see enough youth in the room, unfortunately. But anyhow, colleagues and friends, really it's a pleasure to be with you today. This is a multi-stakeholder dialogue on accelerating climate adaptation in agriculture, a youth perspective. And I'm glad we have many youth in the panel at least, yeah. So I'm really very excited to be with you discussing today's subject, which is very pressing. As we have heard over the days, the global challenges are global and are very depressing. And we need really to focus on solutions, and we need to focus on solutions that we co-create together, particularly with the youth perspective. According to the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, climate change has slowed down agricultural productivity, increased extreme events, also have exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity. And I want to share with you that a few years ago, we came to know that the same seed today produce much less than 30 years ago. And the reason behind, it's mostly the concentration of carbon in the air, in the atmosphere. So it's beyond our comprehension. So even today that we need to produce more, the environment and the ecosystem are not allowing us to because of the carbon sequester, the carbon concentration in the air and the nitrogen concentration as well. So definitely we need solution, and we need those solutions to be co-created with those that are most affected by climate change, who are youth, women, and smallholder farmers, who are really the people that got hit the worst with climate change, and we saw it in Pakistan just a few weeks ago. They will have to adapt and live with the impact of climate change for the next destinies. But they also bring hope, they bring energy, They bring an immense potential in raising awareness and, most importantly, in driving change. And that's where we need those youth, we need those women, we need those small-scale holders to be really outspoken and be part of the solution. They also hold the key to solution in fostering innovation to make agri-food system more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. Younger generation can lead the climate to action in agriculture, and I hope that we will have millions and millions of them. We know few figures in Europe, in Africa, and here and there. We need to call for much more, much larger number of youth to really lead the action, the climate action. However, they still face a multitude of barriers. These include language, restricted mobility, and access to resources or connectivity in rural area, which make youth particularly vulnerable to extreme climate events. And I'm very happy to hear from you, Carla, the emphasis on finance and decent job. If we don't create decent job for youth, they won't come to agriculture. And one of the things we have to abolish, it's visas. If we want people to feel equal, we should not ask them for a visa to go anywhere. Last month, I did an event, Science and Innovation Forum in Rome, and many of the young scientists from Africa and Asia, I could not get them in because of the visa. So we need to start thinking about human rights and taking accessibility to finance, accessibility to land, accessibility to knowledge as a human right, and stop playing those cards of restricting access to youth and people from the South. That is why we must ensure equal access for youth to productive resources, to climate-smart technologies and investment and infrastructure that support inclusivity, resilience, and sustainability. FAO, as an organization from the United Nations, is committed to supporting youth in their efforts to adapt to the impact of climate change and achieving food and nutrition security. FAO strategic framework and 2 independent strategies adopted this year, a climate change strategy and a strategy on science and innovation, recognize the key role of youth and climate adaptation in delivering more sustainable agri-food systems. These strategies aim to empower youth and place them at the center of climate action and at the center of food security. Achieving the strategy's vision means that youth will be actively included in the process of developing and using science and innovation in agriculture for climate action. FAO recently also hosted the World Food Forum, a global youth forum focused on the theme of Healthy Diet, Healthy Planet, along with the Science and Innovation Forum and the Hand in Hand Forum. And there what we try to put over 1 week, it's science and innovation, investment, and youth together. It's provide basically youth with access to know-how, but access to finance so that they give us their own solutions that make sense from their perspective. This forum raised momentum among young people and gave voice to their ideas and how we can adapt agri-food system in face of climate change. FAO Youth Committee and Youth Group also support youth inclusion, as does a recently launched online platform, the Climate Change Knowledge Hub. To ensure sustainable and nutritious food for all, FAO is working with all stakeholders to transform agri-food system. And maybe I should mention as well that within that World Food Forum with science and investment, we had a huge indigenous people presence from Northern Europe, from Latin America, from Africa and Asia, and bringing youth with indigenous people was beautiful. So we didn't look only at youth within the indigenous people, but also youth to learn from indigenous people that are far away from them. Targeted capacity building initiative, financial support for innovative action, and empowering youth in international climate fora are key areas to support youth-led adaptation and resilience building. Climate change affects all of us, and adapting and transforming our agri-food system is a huge task that we must tackle and work together for it. We need everyone on board, particularly again those that are affected the most, youth, women, and smallholders. Dialogue between generation and among stakeholders can help identifying how all of us can make more immediate and targeted progress together. This is a crucial moment for all stakeholders to identify what unites us to move forward for the sake of this generation and future generation. I wish to thank the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizenship and CGIAR and the Fairtrade Foundation for organizing today's session. I look forward to learn from the colleagues and to give my perspective as I am hearing about your initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before we dive into a panel conversation, we now would like to also show you a video from our co-chairman, Dr. SG Ban Ki-moon.
Dear co-hosts, dear distinguished speakers, dear distinguished guests, greetings from Seoul. I'm honored to welcome you today to our official COP27 side event, Accelerating Climate Adaptation in Agriculture, a Youth Perspective. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists who come from diverse backgrounds such as smallholder farming, agricultural research, multilateral organizations, and policymaking. I'm particularly happy to see our Ban Ki-moon Center Agri champions who will represent the voice of youth and their personal experiences on how the agricultural sector is coping with climate change. This is exactly the cross-discipline and intergenerational exchange we need if we are to really solve today's problems. It is clear that the climate crisis is exacerbating a multiple of alarming global issues such as violent conflicts, health matters, and food insecurity. To achieve peace, protect public health, and reduce poverty, we must unite and work together against this crisis. We need all hands on deck together to tackle the threats of climate change. No one can be left behind, especially not the most vulnerable in our society. Communities everywhere around the world are already feeling the full brunt of climate change, often the ones who contributed the least to it. This year alone, we have seen wildfires burn across Europe, devastating floods down Pakistan, record-breaking droughts ravage the Horn of Africa, and deadly storms destroy North America. Dear distinguished guests, during my tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations, I worked tirelessly to bring together world leaders to address the impact and destructive effects of climate change. This resulted in the landmark Paris Climate Change Agreement signed in 2015 by 196 state parties. However, the overwhelming focus on our discussion has been on climate mitigation efforts. I must underline that adaptation also forms a pivotal part of this agreement, yet progress has been lacking. The Egyptian presidency of COP27 has built on the foundation laid by the UK government at COP26. This year, adaptation is starting to move more into the focus of the negotiations and discussions. This is especially true in the context of the global goal on adaptation and the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program, which focuses on defining and realizing a set of worldwide targets for climate change adaptation. These efforts are becoming increasingly essential as more lives are being affected by climate change. Amongst the most impacted are smallholder farmers. They are the least to contribute to the causes of climate change and play a crucial role in our global food system. Throughout sub-Saharan Africa and part of Asia, they produce up to 80% of the nation's food. Despite this, and their key role in sustainable development, they only receive 1.7% of total climate finance. If smallholder farmers are to continue to feed our communities, we have a responsibility to build their resilience to climate change, especially that of the younger generation. With this goal, we at the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens facilitated the development of a demand paper by a selected group of YouthAgri champions from Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Zambia. This group consists of smallholder farmers and farmer representatives as well as agripreneurs, all under the age of 35. Today, we are officially launching this collaborative piece of work and sharing their demands with the civil society, the public and private sectors, and most importantly, with the world leaders heading the climate negotiations. On behalf of the BKMC Agri Champions, I would like to share the three main challenges they face and raise them as critical issues that need immediate solutions. Young smallholder farmers in Africa need funding for farmer-led capacity building efforts for climate-smart agriculture practices, tailored financing for climate-smart investments, and farmer insurances to reduce climate risks. Their invaluable young voices must be brought to the decision-making table, and their demands must be taken into consideration. I trust that our young champion representatives will further detail how important these demands are to support and elevate agricultural adaptation efforts to climate change during today's event. I hope that these clear demands can contribute to shaping the agenda on adaptation in agriculture at COP27 and beyond. Thank you to our young agri champions for their leadership, and thank you for taking part in today's dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and with that, over to you, Sophie, for the panel.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Great. Let's go then. So I'm Sophie. I'm the new director of global advocacy at Fairtrade International. I joined recently. So you know, at Fairtrade we set standards, including climate standards. We have minimum price, premium, but we also have a lot of projects on climate adaptation and mitigation, and we increasingly do also advocacy. I feel extremely privileged, actually, to be moderating this panel together because it's incredibly diverse in terms of the stakeholders that we are bringing. And perhaps the first thing I want to say is that I am very, very impressed by your generation of young people. I'm not young anymore, but I was young not such a long time ago. And as a young human rights activist I was, I really think we have a lot of lessons to learn from your generation of activists, and I'm actually quite hopeful. It's also important to note that 90% of young people live in low and middle income countries and live in communities and countries that are the most affected by climate change, as we have discussed. And we often say that it's about your future, but it's not about your future, it's about your present. I mean, it's about right here and right now. So I think it's also key not only to listen to you on the issues that you are facing, but really on the solutions that you are proposing. Perhaps let's start with an introduction of who we have around the table. And then I'm going to explain a bit what we are aiming at with the session, how we are going to structure that. And then we will start with the panel discussion. So perhaps starting on my far left, so we have already heard from you, Mr. Ishikumba. So you are Director of Policy Analysis and Coordination in the newly created Ministry of Green Economy in Zambia. Then we have Azeez Salawu from Nigeria. You're a climate activist and founder and executive director of the Community Action for Food Security. Then we have also heard from you. We have Ismahan Elaufi, chief scientist at the FAO, and also you've been a member of the scientific group for the 2021 UN Food System Summit. You're also an advocate, as we have already heard, for rethinking food system as a whole, and also an advocate on empowering women in sciences. Then we have Richard Kachungu from Zambia, co-founder of the Young Emerging Farmers Initiative. You have trained more than 10,000 youth people on climate action in the agriculture sector, but also on entrepreneurship and leadership in the food system. And then we have just on my left, Deborah Osei-Mensah from Ghana. You're a young cocoa farmer and lead trainer of a Fairtrade cocoa cooperative in Ghana. And you're training producers in good agriculture practices to mitigate climate change effects. So in terms of the objectives of this session, as we have said, we are aiming at bringing together different perspectives on adaptation in agriculture, and also thinking of how we are actually building resilience of young smallholder farmers, also really in a way that really fits their needs. So as we know, I mean, climate change has a lot of impact on young agricultures in terms of flood, droughts, heat waves, that leads to soil erosion, that also damage crops, and that bring also more pressure from pests. So it's really critical that also at COP27 in general, agriculture, adaptation, loss and damage are really brought on the agenda, and that it really leads to transformative action. So it's not only a question of innovation and techniques, which are absolutely key, but it's also about bringing on the political agenda those issues all together. So the discussion, as was announced, is going to be driven by this document, which is the 3 key demands that were brought together by young agripreneurs from Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Zambia through workshops that took place, I think, in the previous year. And so really the expectation with this session is that at the end of the session, we all have clarity on what needs to happen. So all of us as NGOs, as farmers, as businesses, as policymakers, that we are very clear on what needs to happen. What is the one thing that we need to do once back home? And in terms of the structure, we're going first to discuss about issues, then your recommendations, and then we will try to have a discussion if time allows Let me also tell you that for people joining online and also for people having access to internet in the room, so we will have a discussion in the room, but also feel free to share your thoughts and questions on Twitter using the hashtag #ClockIsTicking and COP27. So I'm going first to address the first question to Azeez and Richard. And yeah, you're not sitting next to each other, but feel free to take those questions as you think is the best. So first, I wanted to ask you how does it feel for you to be at COP? Is it your first COP, and how does it feel so far? You've been there for a bit less than 1 week. So how does it feel? And perhaps why was it important for you to be part of this process of putting together those demands as part of this process supported by the Ban Ki-moon Center? I let you, answer. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please, can you hear me? So I think this is my second COP, and for example, the last one in Glasgow was like I was just roaming around, looking for pavilions or discussions around food systems, because in Nigeria, I happen to be the youth leader for the UN food systems discussion in Nigeria, and myself and the national convener were roaming around looking for activities around the food systems, around agriculture. It was really scanty. Unlike this year, we really have a lot of activities around food systems, and not only that, we have the food and agriculture pavilion, we have the food system pavilion, we have the food for climate pavilion, we have a lot of pavilions discussing the food systems, and I'm very sure you can all agree with me that food is being the center of discussion at this year's COP. And it's actually really, really important for us. And for this activity, it's really important for young people to actually work with the Ban Ki-moon Center to come up with this demand, because, like we've rightly said, young people are actually very vulnerable when it comes to issues around climate change, climate adaptation, and small-scale farmers are really bearing the consequence. So it's actually very strategic for us to actually come with this demand. It's in time, and we are hoping that, for me, I'm really feeling that I came to COP having a mixed feelings, because a lot of financial commitments have been made, but then how are we going to follow up with these commitments? Who is going to make sure that we're actually following up with all these commitments post-COP? So it's actually very important and strategic for young people to actually see how we can actually also be included in all this conversation. We having a demand paper is actually very strategic, because we are going to follow it to details, and we are hoping that our leaders, food systems that are willing to support this process of we championing this cause. It's actually very important. We're happy to be part of it, and we look forward to more exciting engagements post-COP. Thank you. Richard, over.
Yeah. Thank you, Azeez. For me, actually, this is my first COP. The Glasgow, I was supposed to come here at Glasgow, but my colleague, now who is also a co-founder, is the one who actually attended the Glasgow one. So for me, the COP 27 for me is a learning experience. And I was also just privileged to be accredited by my government. So I'm also having a privilege to also go into negotiation rooms and just getting the opportunity to learn what's going on and see how the process is done and so forth. So for me, it's a learning experience, and I'm actually excited. And I think with regard to the question of why it's important for young people to be actually involved in this process, I think it's critical, especially us who are representing farmers or are farmers on the ground. Because the farmer is a fundamental, I think they are very fundamental to the food system, since everything starts with the farmer. All food what we eat starts with the farmer. And it's very important that we have that voice of a farmer being represented in such discussions. And with regard with what the Ban Ki-moon Center is doing, quite an amazing job to ensure that they engaged with those young people that are actually dealing with the actual farmer, especially those in rural areas who don't even have an opportunity to have these conversations that we're having here, who might find these conversations as gibberish to them because maybe they do not really maybe understand the science or understand the process that's going on at that level. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So let's discuss in the second part of the discussion the hopes you have with this COP in terms of food systems. So yeah, it's more on the agenda. So what are your hopes in terms of what we're really going to get out of that? So you say everything starts with the farmers, but right now with the huge effects of climate change, what would you say is the most challenging for young farmers because of climate change? And also, what are the biggest barriers for you to adapt to climate change? And yeah, for the moment, what would be the key issues that really you're facing? And you can, yeah. And I'll ask the same question to Deborah afterwards.
All right, thank you. So for us in Nigeria, we actually work with small-scale farmers at Community Action for Food Security. And like the name entails, it's really about community ownership. So the challenge with small-scale farmers, the challenge we have is, the first one is the issue around getting to know even what climate change is, because when we engage them, most of them really don't even understand what climate change is. And when we now go deeply, most of their comment is, oh, maybe climate change is a result of the offense their forefather, made, and that is why God is really punishing them with lack of access, lack of rain, or too much rain or flooding. So it's really a challenge explaining to them to make them understand that no, that is not what it is. Climate change is actually here, and we all need to adapt to it. So it's really a challenge because they feel that a lot of things that are changing naturally. For example, most of them believe in their seeds. So we get to make them understand that no, yes, you have seeds, you have the traditional seeds, but then climate is actually changing. Science is coming on board, and there are a lot of hybrid seeds. There are a lot of seeds, improved seedlings that could really help them get more tonnage in terms of production. So most of them really find it very difficult to believe this until they see for themselves. And part of what we use is when we engage them in the community, they really don't want to listen to us. So we have to go through their local leaders for them to actually listen to us. And when they see it, they embrace it. Not only embrace it, they don't want anything free. They are even willing to pay for it. So those are it's actually very, very challenging because people in the rural communities, small-scale farmers, for example, in Nigeria, 80% of production are being done by small-scale farmers. But then everything around policy is not favoring them. So that's another challenge. Issues around policies affecting are not being centered around small-scale farmers, and it's really challenging. So part of what we're actually doing is to make them understand that yes, aside from engaging with the policymakers, there's a way you can actually strategically engage with them to tell them the problems and see how they can actually provide solutions to all these problems. Last 3 weeks in Nigeria, we had issue of flooding. It killed over 600,000 people, displaced over 1 million households, and it's still there. So now these challenges are actually vast, but then as we working with them on the ground, we do our best to make them understand that yes, climate change is here, and there's really need for them to adapt to it, using different climate smart practices for them to actually, get themselves ahead of climate change. And that is part of what we're actually doing in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with my colleague Azeez. It's also very important to just highlight the fact that most young people, I think, across the world feel the same, especially in the food system. I think one of the biggest issues that young people are facing is meaningful engagement. And I think we need to narrow down and differentiate the difference between participation and meaningful engagement. And I think most of the times, young people are just allowed to participate in platforms, opportunities that are valuable, or programs or projects that are there, especially in the food system. And I think it's one of the biggest issues that young people have, And from my experience in working with young people in my country, I think most young people will come out in the open and actually say that. And you could see clear examples of it happening from various, for instance, financial opportunities that are there, how many young people are accessing it, and so forth. So it's very important because for me, financial aspects of the food system is very critical, especially if we're talking about adaptation. And it's very important that the issue of accessibility is highlighted. And young people have that challenge in terms of how they could access these finances. You will find that in most cases, financial institutions or creditors have very strict conditions that basically restrict young people to have access to these finances. And at times you tend to wonder when these finances are actually brought into these programs, stating that young people are being empowered, and yet the conditions are restricting young people from having access to these finances. So it's very important that even as much as we're designing these financial models or this ecosystem within the financial sector, we need to ensure that the aspect of de-risking financial agricultural financing is looked at critically, because we keep on using this term, we're de-risking agricultural financing, and yet accessibility is still a challenge for most young people. And it's very important that we highlight that. And the issue of adequacy as well. I think for us to adapt, especially for young people, there's need to have adequate financial resources. And this is what we are also facing as young people. We have been challenges to have adequate access to these financial resources. So young people have been crying, I think, for some time. I think it's very important that we listen. And if we don't listen, we'll be talking about the same thing over and over. And I think that's the full definition of insanity. And unfortunately, that's something that has been happening over time. And so my organization, Young Emerging Farmers Initiative, has been highlighting on such issues. How do we create financial models that are responsive to young people to be able to access? And it's very important that we do that, because adaptation is very expensive. Looking at the fact that there's been a lot of conventional agriculture that have been done over time, and there's need for us to transform from that. So I think those are some of the challenges there.
Thank you very much. You're already actually starting to discuss about the solutions, which is great. And actually, I was quite hopeful with what Mrs. Montesi from the European Commission was explaining, both in terms of indeed engaging with young people with their youth action plan, but also in terms of the access to finance. So perhaps let's dig into those issues in the second part. Deborah, perhaps same question for you. What are the main challenges? But also looking at your specific perspective as a young woman and as a farmer in the cocoa sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here and then to be part of this great panelists. Deborah, cocoa producer, yes, work for a Sunafo cooperative union, cocoa producing union of about 10,000 cocoa producers. And then out of that, we are working with about 44% women farmers. As a young farmer, I had experience to what farming was in the early 2000s when as a young girl going to farm with my parents. One thing I really noticed was during that time, farmers could have a plan on how the season is going to be like. And with less or no limitation, this plan will be implemented. When to plant, when to harvest, and all those things. But currently, climate is gradually shifting the timing of agriculture, making farmers just hoping instead of planning. So farmers just have to hope the next year could be better, productivity could be better. But looking at the agriculture sector as a business, the question now becomes, can we build business on hopes? How long can farmers be profitable when all they do is just wake up and hope the season will be better for them? For some years now, farmers are facing a lot of challenges, just like the youth. It's basically the same. So one challenge I could talk about is low productivity. This comes with warmer weather or cooler weather, flooding here, pests and diseases all over, and then farmers have to deal with this. And then also, as a business for farmers where they earn income, have to take care of their family and other expenses, these businesses are being threatened. Because if a farmer wakes up and at the end of the season, what they are expected to get from their business, they are not getting it, then their work is at a risk. They are losing their livelihoods. And then we talk about the cost of production. We talk about adaptation. Adaptation comes with a cost. And this cost a farmer has to finance with the low income they are receiving now. Already without climate, farmers' pricing and other things are not being very fair to farmers, getting low income. And they have to adapt to climate with this low income. So each time the gap, their living income gap, keeps widening. We can also talk about the challenge of sustainability. We are looking at more youth engaging in the agri sector. Now the leaders, the older generation in the sector, who is to handle and testify about this business to the younger ones are not profitable. They are not profiting, they are not getting what they are supposed to get. So how can they hand over, and how can youth also get involved in this sector? These are some of the challenges producers are facing. And now, as a young producer, out of school, you have lack of access to land because you don't have money to buy land. It's very difficult to get the land. And now, fortunately for you, if you're able to acquire a land, now climate is at your head, at your neck, everywhere you go. You need money, you need resources to adapt to this climate. But you don't have any property collateral for loans and other things. So your access to finance is also limited. And so you also become part of the family of farmers hoping that the year will be better for you. So these are some of the challenges producers are facing. And then on the part of a young women, you know, already women I describe as homemakers, marketers, talk about all the management in the house and on the farm, yet these people are less looked upon when it comes to farming. And so with climate adaptation, looking at high cost of productivity, how can these women also get the resources? These are the women, when we are talking about policies on agriculture, how to better finance the system, they are left out. And so it becomes very challenging for a woman to even be seated on the table to make their voice heard than talk about access to finances. So basically, women and youth share similar challenges when it comes to agriculture. But these things need to be changed because women, you put women here, you put youth here, they are the future of agriculture. You talk about food production in the system, and I can boldly say more than 80% of the food that comes on our table are being produced by women. But these are the same people who are limited to resources to make their farms better. When we talk about the full force for future food security, we are looking at youth. And these are the people we least consult, we least listen to them, we least look at them when making policies. And so these are some of it. And then also we talk about information, lack of information. Farming, I always say if you want to know a community that is actively engaged in farming, there are some specific things you look at. Lack of internet access, bad road network, poor social amenities. So these farmers have low access to good information, educating them on what is happening and how they can adapt or how they can create resilience to it. So these are also some of the challenges women are facing in our community, and then as well as youth also, yeah.
Thank you so much to the three of you. We're actually already running a bit out of time, but I really wanted to give you this space, and I really hope also we have time then to discuss about the solutions. Perhaps to Ismahan, so we have heard about all those challenges in terms of food security, lack of meaningful engagement, the cost of adaptation, access to finance, and all the specific challenges Deborah just explained also of, the intersectionality of being a young woman in the farming sector. So I guess all this is really echoing also what you have seen through your work at the FAO. Perhaps briefly, is there anything that you would add on that? Or perhaps just strengthen? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think really what we heard from Azeez, Richard, and Deborah really paint the picture very well. So basically, it's very much reinforcing our own analysis. Agriculture is a seasonal work. It's a seasonal business. And this seasonal business, it's very risky business to start with. Without climate change, there is a risk that you get a disease or a risk that you get anything that can wipe away your months and months of work. But with climate change and with the variability that we have right now, it's becoming more risky. So what we need to do is definitely to de-risk the business, the agri-food system. We cannot keep putting on the farmer's shoulder all the risk. And that's where public institutions are needed. That's why policy is needed. That's why public investment is needed. So what I'm hearing from the colleague, it's really that access to finance is very important. What I will add to the access of knowledge, access to land, access to resources, access to know-how, it's really adding the component of de-risking the agri-food system to allow youth to come and have, as we heard earlier, a decent job and good revenues. In terms of meaningful engagement, I think really it's very important what you said, Richard. It's very important for us really to almost reverse the way we are doing it. So most of the time, we start solving an issue from our own perspective. And maybe we are completely outside the real problem. So we need to bring those people that we are trying to solve their problems and listen to them. And I agree with the colleagues that adaptation is key. We should have started 20 years ago. We are running out of time. Adaptation, it's must. And what I would want to say, science and innovation, it's here to help us adapt. So when you talk about access to seeds, there are new technologies that allow us to reduce the price by 90%, to reduce the time by another 80–70%. So science and innovation is mature enough to help us walk the path of adaptation, and it is costly again, and we need really support of financial institution and developed world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps last question to Mr. Ichikumba, and thank you very much for joining this discussion. So in Zambia, agriculture represents 20% of GDP, and it employs 75% of the population. So it's really a priority sector for poverty reduction and food security in Zambia. And perhaps a bit the same question actually that I asked to the other colleagues. It's what are the key challenges that you are facing in Zambia when it comes to climate adaptation in the agriculture sector, but also really through the lens of smallholder farmers? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm a public official, of course, working for government. but I also do some side farming. So I do understand quite well the challenges which the farmers go through, especially the younger farmer, especially the farmer who is just starting, is still building social capital, and the necessary experience. Yes, but the main challenge really, I think, as my colleague has put it, I think the challenge number one is financing to facilitate adaptation, if I were to put it that way. In the last couple of years, maybe if we go 5 years backwards, 5 to 10 years backwards, the rain season has been becoming shorter and shorter. In some 15, 20 years ago, we would receive rain maybe a bit in October, but the main rain season started around mid-November. You have it up to end of April. But now you can actually reach Christmas without a single drop of rain in most parts of the country. So we are 1 month short behind or late. The rains come over a month late, most of it, in the last 5, 6 years, and then by the rain stop a month or so early. So which means that the farmer has to be able to plant very quickly and be able to have also have the crop mature within that very short period of time when it rains. So it requires different types of seed, those seeds which are early maturing, which is part of innovation, which is part of adaptation. So you have to adapt to new varieties of seed, which science should help bring about on the market. And of course, the government, the policymakers, those people, the bureaucrats, the Ministry of Agriculture are supposed to facilitate. They do try, and they tell farmers that if you are in this region, this time around, please plant this kind of seed. But then also because of the issue of not having sufficient financing, farmers are slow to adapt or to go to those other seeds which they really don't know. So it's the issue of that adaptation. We can supplement our agriculture with some irrigation. We've got a reasonably good amount of underground water, which either you can start a little bit early, a certain portion of your farm, sizable amount of your farming can be done by agriculture, but again, it requires a lot of investment capital. Our wheat production is entirely produced under irrigation. We produce, I think, somewhere around 300,000 metric tons of wheat, all irrigated, but it's heavy investment. A young farmer no bank will give him or her the kind of financing required for them to invest in irrigated agriculture. So it's financing. Then maybe secondary to that, the issue of information, also like to the farmer to be well informed as to which crops really can sustain their livelihood, which crops they can grow as business, and how, the how part, things that to do now with the extension, public sector investment in extension services and the like, to teach the farmer what to do and how to do it well, so that they don't find themselves in some sort of financial ruin because of 1 or 2 simple mistakes. Yes, so that also is it's a challenge, the information part. Then also our farmers at times, there are certain things which they are used, which they've been doing, which they are used to do, and changing, adapting to newer methods, new agricultural practices is a bit a challenge on their part. But the good thing is the young, though we don't have that many of them coming into agriculture, after they finish high school, get a university degree, they are looking for jobs, formal jobs, and very few really go to agriculture. But at least of late, we've been having younger people with graduates from university who go straight into agriculture, and those are very innovative. I think we can actually use them as role models for other farmers. They easily adapt. They are there in farming, they take it as a business, and they are able to adapt to whatever the crops, and even how to do it, value addition. They can even do value addition at the farm level before the commodity finds its way to the market. So financing, information, and okay, part of policy also on the side of us as a government. Of course, we do take some blame that maybe we could do better to make the environment, the farming environment, more conducive to entry by the younger farmers, younger people. I think this is what I can say for now.
Thank you. So we will need to speed up a little bit to discuss on the solutions. But perhaps first, there is this paper in which Richard and Azeez have contributed. So you're putting there 3 key asks. Can you perhaps explain why those 3? And perhaps just very briefly, if you can list some very practical measures that would really have a lot of impact, immediate impact for young farmers. And I'll let you decide who answers and what. If you can do that quite briefly so that we have time also to hear from Deborah afterwards on the solution. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So briefly, I would really like to start with the first demand, which has to do with funding of farmers-led capacity building around climate-smart agriculture. And that is actually we calling on our leaders to actually support the establishment of school establishments that would really help us train farmers on their land. And from there, after the training, they will also bring in other people in the community, and establish that place and call it like a center of excellence for them to be able to train other farmers in that community. That is actually very key, because it's really not going to take a lot of things. They are going to be communicating with other farmers in their local languages, and it would really help them to adapt to the effect of climate change, because most of the training will be around climate-smart agricultural practices that will really help them to adapt and stay resilient to the effect of climate change. It's actually very important, and we are calling on our leaders to actually do this for us. It's actually very important. I don't know if Richard can actually give us the second one, and we'll wrap up with the third one. Thank you.
Okay, so with regards to the demand action on finance itself, the provision of responsive finance, I think there's need to evaluate our financial ecosystems that we have, especially financial institutions, creditors need to reevaluate how they've been doing their financing, especially where young people are concerned. And it's also important that we ensure that these resources are responsive. They are responsive to the need, because in the food system, we are all aware they are different. For instance, the example that the person from the ministry highlighted, the director, to say the changes in the climate and our conditions have caused the rainfall pattern in Zambia also to change. So there's need for that finance to be responsive to that. And it's not just a matter of providing finances, because if you tag a farmer with a high rate, interest rate, we need to ensure that that interest is also tailored to how they are doing the agriculture financing, agriculture undertaking, and so forth. So it's very important that that financing is responsive to rainfall situation, and as well as just the context of the conditions that we have in the particular areas. And then the issue of insurance. It's important that insurance is also put on the table, because this will also give confidence to young farmers to go into agriculture. Even the aspect of adaptation can be, I think, made easy for farmers to want to adapt, because I think there's also that aspect where farmers want some sort of guarantee, because we cannot just ask for farmers to transform or to transform to another form of agriculture if they are not guaranteed, for instance, income that will sustain them for a particular year. So it's important that we have insurance as well embedded in our programming. So we're talking about aspects of ensuring even anticipatory payouts can be made, because I think that can also help a farmer to plan in terms of mitigation in case they face challenges in terms of climate. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Deborah, what would be your take on what you've heard, also from the colleague from the Zambian government, but also on those key demands elaborated by Richard and Azeez? And perhaps I would add one point. So, Ismahen, you spoke about the importance of public policies, and indeed, one thing that is really key is for policymakers to adopt the right regulatory frameworks. But also we haven't touched upon a lot on the role of businesses in terms of paying fair prices, because as you're saying, adaptation comes with a cost. And perhaps one last thing would be agroecology and agroforestry as ways also to adapt to climate change. So yeah, could you perhaps give us your take on all this? And sorry that we are pressed by time. Sorry, Deborah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with the solutions given, but also I can say as farmers, Fairtrade certified farmers, we don't just sit and wait for government to finance, for organization to finance. We also do our best because that is our work we do. And so with our premiums coming in, we also invest into other activities that will also enhance the farmers' adaptation to climate. Yes, financing producers is important, but what is most important to us is producers having diverse source of income so that they can also at a time finance their activity. And so to add on to the solution, I think it's time we also introduce other income generating activities to producers. My cooperative, we have already adapted into the dynamic agroforestry system, but it's good to scale up to make sure enough farmers are benefiting from it. We have a mutual support scheme that is a credit union that is providing a low interest finance to farmers. I think it's something that the government to set up. In my country, there was a bank set up for agriculture sector, and now it's being dominated by businesses. Now, if farmers go there for loan, they no longer have access. But I think it's very important to set up such financial institutions targeting agriculture, especially youth in agriculture and women in agriculture as well. And then also, we have to change our educational system, make a room for innovation for youth to be more innovative, bring out innovative ideas into the agriculture system. And then in agriculture, it's a value chain. So we shouldn't just look at youth going into the production. There's a lot of activities you can do in the chain that can enhance adaptation at the production level. And so that can also be looked at. And then intentionally, we had to make sure youth and women are involved in leadership. We don't just open room for them to compete with men, but intentionally we have to make sure they are involved in leadership positions and then also in decision making as well. And I think with this, and of course, fair pricing is very important. It's very key for farmers to be paid a fair price to enable them feel their labor put into production is well respected. And of course, the agriculture sector should also be looking at in a different perspective. It's not a business center for the poor, the school dropouts or anything. It's a venture. Each person, even the educated ones, want to go in. I think the minister mentioned the university students don't want to be in agriculture. I'm having my master's degree and I still want to be on the farm. We want to be on the farm, but circumstances surrounding farming and agriculture is what is pushing us away. And so if our government and organization can make the environment very conducive for us, we will put our ideas there, we will be on the farm and make sure there's sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So perhaps the last question for you, Claudia. So first, what do you think of these demands that were formulated? And perhaps another thing specific to Zambia. So your government is working on a national adaptation plan, and also I think a green growth strategy. And last year you have updated also your national determined contribution, and they also look at sustainable agriculture, forest management, renewable energy, etc. What would you say, briefly, if you can, that is there in those documents for those young farmers? So how can you respond also to those demands? Thank you very much.
Yeah, in terms of the green growth path for relating to our farmers, there are programs which are being set, which are being implemented to help actually the farmers learn on, or actually practice that. There's one which we call conservation farming method. This is a method whereby you do less tillage. The way our farmers have been operating in the past is year in, year out, you bring in a disc plow, either drawn by oxen, animal draft power, or those who are able to hire a tractor, or some even using a handy hoe. They'll dig out the land, plow it, turn it up. And I'm told, I'm not a scientist, I'm an economist by training. I'm told by digging out the soil like that, you are releasing some of the carbon up in the atmosphere. But if you do what they call conservative farming, you just make rows deep, you plow less, maybe at most 20% of the land is what you plow. You just make lines with a reaper and the like. So the advantage is that you have high soil, high moisture retention in the soil with that kind of planting. Therefore, even when you have stress, weather stress, your crop is still able to survive, and you are still able to conserve the soils and the environment. So I think I would say that's like the main flagship project on making sure that the small-scale farmers, the farmers are practicing climate change-related farming practices. Then, of course, yes, as we've mentioned, we've got for 1 year now, we've had a ministry for green economy, which is to help chart the pathway for a green growth. There is a project to plant trees. It's called the Integrated Forestry Landscaping, something like that. I didn't get the exact title, but it's about planting trees in certain areas which are quite vulnerable in terms of climate change. So far, I think in the last 2-3 years, we've planted about 7.5 million trees. So there's that project, and farmers are actually encouraged to go into tree crops. What we are used to is the grass, maize, groundnuts, such kind of thing. But now farmers are actually told that you can also farm trees, a farm for trees, which can be used for wood processing, timber, and the like. Then also some deliberate measures have been put in place to encourage what we call forest products. Certain areas should never be disturbed with farming. From those areas, we harvest honey, bee honey, and other products which come out of the forest. So also to help conserve the forest, you have so much forest, then you have got you are increasing on the carbon sinks, I think, as you call them, and therefore mitigating on the climate change effect. Well, there are other areas, other talks, which are really being, let's say, on the use of inorganic chemical fertilizer. Yes, that's another area where the government is emphasizing that we should cut down as much as possible on the use of chemical fertilizer, do other kind of organic fertilizers. There are several companies which are producing that. But of course, the mindset, the farmers are used to a certain kind of fertilizer which they know once they apply, they will see their crop becoming green and the like. So this new organic fertilizer, will it really deliver? So the issue of advocacy, removing the fears from the farmers that this new innovative input is as effective as the other one which they know. But okay, in a nutshell, those are some of the programs which are targeted towards small-scale farmers regarding climate change reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that we need to end the discussion now because we are almost at the end of the session. But I really hope that the discussion really clarified what our homework is for all of us. Sorry, Ismahan, you want to say last point? Or?
Maybe the three solutions are excellent. What I would add is one, which is really accessibility to know-how to all farmers, and affordability of innovation. So most innovation are too expensive. We need really to look at how we work with the private sector to reduce the cost for the farmers. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the brevity. So thank you really very much to all of you. And I really hope that now we have the tools to really act on all those demands that you made. And over to you for the conclusion.
A very subtle way of coming up on stage. Thank you very much for your very lively discussion and very interesting to listen to all of you. I think we all learned that we need everybody on board. We need everybody's role to play their roles to really make it access equal to all kinds of resources and to make it adequate for everybody on every level to create an enabling environment where farmers can actually thrive and young people can stay on the farms if they're interested. But I'm not taking more of the stage because we have one last concluding remark, and that is from Mr. Essa Mohammed from our partner at CGIAR, and that will be the last time you'll see me, so thank you very much, and over to Mr. Mohammed.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me recognize that it is really great to see such a diverse and gender-balanced panel today, which is really wonderful, isn't it? But not only that, but also exclusively youthful and young panelists as well. I'm not excluding anyone here. So, with that said, Excellencies, distinguished guests, delegates today, let me first of all also thank and express my appreciation to the people and government of Egypt for their warm hospitality, for us to be able to convene like this at COP27. Let me also start by acknowledging the leadership of His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, both for championing youth in agriculture and making the clear connection between the way that we produce and consume food and our changing climate. At this COP, we have seen growing recognition that climate change and food security as two of some of the most urgent challenges the world is facing are inextricably linked. And I think it's unlike any other COP. I think this COP in particular, we've made that emphasis, so I think that should be certainly celebrated. With this comes the acknowledgement that food systems can and must be part of the mitigation and adaptation solutions as well. Just changing that narrative from just the doom and gloom of climate change, but also how can agriculture or food systems become part of the solution in the fight against climate change. And it's also heartening to see the cause so eloquently expressed by our many young speakers today. What a valuable opportunity this has been to hear the voice of young agricultural stakeholders who will shape our future food systems. We are often, and quite rightly so, challenged as members of a different generation, let's put it that way, with the question, what can the leaders of today do for the leaders of tomorrow? And I generally believe the youth are the future, and the future is the youth, right? And let's talk about Africa. As a fellow African myself, let me give you a few statistics. In Africa, by 2030, our youth population will increase by 42%. By 2055, it's projected to double or more than double. So therefore, I think the solution and the leadership should lie and must lie with the youth. So I would answer as leaders, it is imperative that today we take a longer view, prioritizing issues that, if neglected, will have a devastating and possibly irreversible effect on our future. And indeed, climate change is the most obvious example of that. We hear it loud and clear from the many young people present here in Sharm el-Sheikh and beyond. It is our future, they tell us. What are you waiting for? The energy that the youth bring to these debates reminds us daily of the responsibility we have to ensure a brighter future for our children, their children, and for all future generations and humanity as a whole. So we must be so grateful for the youth movements across the world that are agitating so loudly for change. And we must be thankful that some of you here to take those strong messages, or for taking those strong messages to events like this, COP, for instance. And it might be my personal observation, but I think we have seen much more youth participation this year than in the past. And I think that's something to celebrate as well. So let's not despair. So it's clearly to youth that we must look for future leadership. And that's why this intergenerational exchange, as His Excellency Ban Ki-moon described it, is so important. We heard from some leaders this week and last week that we are waging a battle for human security. And I genuinely believe that's so true. And as the CGIAR, where I belong and where I come from, one of the largest network of agricultural research that's focused on the food systems in which we produce, distribute, and consume food, I would add that this is a battle also for food security, without which, of course, we wouldn't have human security. But also, as the distinguished panelists clearly articulated earlier today in their discussion, none of this would be possible. Any sort of transformation would not be possible unless we address some of those systemic barriers that we face, be it financial exclusion, exclusion from market services, institutional bias, power disparities or imbalances. All these systemic challenges and barriers need to be eliminated so we can transform our food systems, make it part of the solution, and realize a shared prosperity for this generation and the generations to come. And Ismahan, you said we should have started adaptation 20 years ago, which reminded me a very apt Arabic proverb. Right, we are in Egypt, so there's a very famous Arabic proverb that which goes, أفضل توقية لزرع الشجرة كان قبل 20 سنة وأفضل ثاني توقية هو الآن. In other words, it means the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So therefore, let's not despair. Let's make the change happen now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
What is Isam? Isam should be with us. What is he? He's here, yeah. He's coming here, yeah. In front. Come, guys, here.
Yeah, the most important thing was to listen to it. Yeah.